everybody, and welcome back to the Sunday Shot here on Easter Sunday. Christ has risen, for those of you so inclined to believe such fantasy. But
did that happen? I've been so swamped by all the crazy stuff happening in America. Jesus is back.
Jesus is back, and he's strode out of that cave, blood dripping from his side, ready to take over the world. Although I will confess that we are actually recording this on Thursday. We not able to do a show Easter Sunday. We wanted to give our panelists the weekend off, but we wanted to bring you, our audience, some content, and we've got some great interviews lined up for you. So it'll be Dave and me, and then we'll be heading into some interviews that you can look at you get that thumb at your leisure over the lengthy long weekend that we have in front of us and indeed behind us. Dave, how are you going? How are you feeling about where we're sitting at the moment in the midpoint of this election campaign?
I am trying not to drink whiskey and get angry at people on the internet. That's sort of where I am at the moment. I am getting eye twitches from just the profound unseriousness of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anthony Albanese taking a strong pro-Vegemite stance while not being able to utter anything about fascism or genocide it's doing things to my state of peace and calm and the respect I have for this entire apparatus, to be perfectly honest. Joe, how are you doing?
Well, look, I took one for the team and I watched the leaders' debate on Wednesday night.
I decided to bash my head into a brick wall instead because I am trying to get rid of self-destructive habits from my personal life.
Yeah, it was kind of extraordinary because the two leaders were falling over themselves to endorse the relationship that we have with the US. Even David Spears was raising an eyebrow that there really is no contingency planning that they're prepared to talk about in relation to AUKUS, despite everything that is going on over on the other side of the world, despite the fact that, you know, Canada is about to, in an extraordinary turnaround for the Liberals, elect or re-elect, endorse Carney as PM. He's never been in Parliament, so interesting thing, but has had a very successful career as the central banker over in the UK. Simply because they're so terrified about what is happening down on their southern borders. Europe is basically creating a whole new defence and security apparatus, diplomatic apparatus. The UK is having to re-embrace Europe after everything that they've been through, all because of what's going on in America. And yet down here, we're saying nothing to see here, business as usual, we can trust Trump because Albo's had 2 phone conversations with him. It seems to me to be abject denialism, which is serving no one at all.
It's detached from reality, and increasingly this cognitive dissonance, I'm just encountering it in day-to-day life all the time. Yesterday I had someone, I speak to a lot of strange people on the internet, but yesterday I don't have a position on the genocide, but I do take offense at your swearing. And that just felt like such a good microcosm for, I don't know, Western liberalism at the moment,
Yeah. So, look, I did dive into the weeds about what was happening on the trail. I still have a fascination with it. There is still going to be a government elected in a couple of weeks' time.
Is it a morbid fascination, though?
Yeah, it is. It's a morbid fascination, and I think increasingly people are accepting that the government that's going to be elected is not going to be a coalition government in majority or minority. Nikki Savers' op-ed or analysis yesterday, or what was then Wednesday and this Tuesday in the Sydney Morning Herald, talking about where she would be talking to coalition frontbenchers a few months ago. They had real hope, if not expectation. And now when they saw her number, they literally didn't even say hello. It was Labor majority, probably, possibly minority. But you'd have to say that this is actually a fair response to the way that Dutton and his front bench have behaved and performed on the campaign trail. And particularly for me, I think, whilst I'm not necessarily endorsing Chalmers' position that the verballing of the Indonesian president by Dutton in relation to cooperation with Russia was in and of itself a disqualifying moment, it did reveal a lot about Dutton, or it reinforced what we know about Dutton, that he is prepared to use anything at all to try and further his domestic political position. So he is prepared to junk foreign affairs, to junk national security, if he perceives that there is a domestic advantage. I mean, we recall that we had all the intelligence agencies coming out and saying, you need to be, not naming Dutton, but clearly about Dutton, we need to be a bit careful about what we say, particularly around China. It's not helpful for these sorts of statements to being made, and Dutton would just double down. So he is careless with matters of great import for his own political ends.
Can I go further than that? I don't think it's careless. I think it's calculated. And every time Dutton emerges into the national consciousness to push something, he is pushing fear. It is African games. It is, it doesn't, terrorists from Turkestan. It doesn't really matter. That's what he knows how to do. And it is effective. This is the troubling part of it. We talked about pseudo-populism last week. Psychologically, it works. And this is something we have to safeguard against if we get a chance to build a better society sometime in the next 80 years.
Yeah, no, and he is mostly prepared to sacrifice black and brown bodies in order to foment the fear.
This is the way of the Western world, and I think lots of people are seeing that maybe for the first time after what they've seen in Gaza. So
what they've seen in Gaza, what they've seen Trump now, how they've seen him maneuvering. I mean, even just overnight, Marjorie Taylor Greene was holding a town hall and there were people protesting outside, and some people came in and sat to listen who were potentially constituents of hers and were nonetheless were peaceful voters in the US. And as soon as anybody asked a question that was critical of her or Trump, or indeed someone posted on Blue Sky, they didn't even say anything. They were just not cheering and, raving and ranting as she was spouting her racist rubbish. So they started being filmed. And then the people who were literally dragged out by American police officers, these were not private security guards. It was, the instruments of the state. They were dragging out particularly the black people, and only black Americans were tasered, even as they sought to leave the building. So it is, again, this sort of reinforcement or an othering of anybody who isn't part of the white supremacist kind of movement that's going on in the US and, as you point out, globally.
I saw a 7-year-old girl wearing a Mickey Mouse t-shirt on her way to school, put in a black unmarked van. She was a brown-skinned person, and I have no idea where she is right now.
Yeah.
And both of our prime ministerial candidates don't want to talk about this.
No, they don't. And yet we're all seeing it. And you'll hear from Alex Fein in a minute, where she talks about the fact that Trump and what is going on in the US is playing a big role in the way the less engaged voters are now viewing our election. It's not necessarily an overt thing or even a particularly conscious thing, but they're looking over there, and the last thing they want is to see that come here. And it is impacting on the way people are making up their minds about who to vote. And obviously that's played very badly for Dutton. Mm-hmm. And all of his various front benchers who at various points have endorsed what Trump is doing, have praised what Trump is doing, or actually just personally embrace the kind of direction of what he's doing. But it's not working for the coalition when it comes to voting. Oh, look,
Such
see,
a heavy conversation.
this is a special Easter bunny kind of moment for you right there. Oh, but yeah, it's not working, and people are really afraid of what's going on, and they're clear-eyed about it in a way that's not coming through in the commentary.
I would say they are clear-eyed about it, but the other thing that I want us to start doing in this country is to start thinking 3 or 4 election cycles ahead, not necessarily just about this one. Because if you actually want to avoid what's happening in America, you do need to address wealth inequality.
Yeah.
You just absolutely have to. And you have to take stances against things like genocide, because what people don't seem to get about descent into fascism is that it's not, yes, one political movement ends up, heralding where you can finally tick that box. But over a much longer period, it's the gradual erosion of a society's soul and morality. And it's the things you accept along the way that ultimately get you to the point where you've got fucking Nazis everywhere. And I mean, look at it. Australia doesn't want to talk about what's happening in Palestine. This is part of that piece of the puzzle. These are the same struggles. And I would just urge people to think about this in the next decade, not just this election.
Well, I'd asked Alex, as we mentioned with Ben Rowie when he was on the show a few weeks ago, about whether Gaza was having any impact on voting intention, and particularly in those seats where they have Muslim votes, either candidates or endorsements. And I was looking mostly at here in Western Sydney, but of course there is also Wills down in Victoria. And look, her view is that it is very hard, as we all know, to run an independent campaign, particularly in areas where they haven't had a tradition of independence. So the chances of those candidates, there's really almost no chance that they'll be successful, but even having a material impact on the particular, whether it's Burke's seat or Chris Bowen's seat is another one that's been mentioned, but it seems unlikely. But I think it's important that they are there, even if they are acting more as ginger candidates, to ensure that the issue is at the forefront of the campaign in seats where it's particularly personal.
I think McNamara is another seat that fits that equation, which is where I live, because the local member, Josh Burns, an ALP guy, is a Zionist. There's a very smiley photo of him shaking Benjamin Netanyahu's hand. He is the member that's been putting the pressure on the universities to adopt this very restrictive definition of anti-Semitism. Right. There is also, so it's a freeway race. It's very close between the Liberals, the Labor Party candidate, and the Greens. Anyone could take this seat. The Labor Party has decided to do an open ticket because they can't handle preferencing the Greens above the Liberal Party on matters of not committing genocide.
I think that is absolutely extraordinary that they have done that. I mean, they really have never done it elsewhere that I'm aware, or not in recent memory that I can think of, because in the end, the main game for the Labor Party has to be to keep the Liberals or the Nationals, the coalition, from winning seats. So to jeopardise that for the sin of the Greens talking truthfully about Israel's behaviour in Gaza seems absolutely extraordinary to me.
I think it should be illustrative and come as a warning for the direction of that party. I really think people need to pay attention to this stuff much more than we are.
And look, it's interesting. Albo never misses an opportunity to bash the Greens, which, sure, there may be absolutely no chance that they will go into a formal coalition with the Greens in the lower house. But sure as hell, if it is a minority government, which perhaps is a possibility which is receding somewhat given just how appalling Dutton, and is indeed his entire front bench, with a few notable exceptions, have been. Not exceptions of people that I like, but I have to say James Patterson is normally pretty solid a communicator, even if he's saying appalling things. even Jane Hume, Michael Sucker, not bad. But then you get below those sort of communication competence, you get, Angus Taylor. I mean, Bridget McKenzie. Oh my God. And then there's just this whole range of people. I was looking at them, people that Susan Lay, but people that you'd never actually heard of. Like, I'd never heard of Jonathan Duniam. You heard of him?
No, what does he do?
He is the Shadow Minister for the Environment.
Oh, so he does nothing then. Okay.
So he does nothing. Kevin Hogan.
No?
He's the Shadow Minister for Trade, which you think at the moment, given everything that's going on in the world of trade.
Hear from the Shadow Minister for Trade, see if he's got some good ideas.
Yeah. But no, nothing. So given all of the invisibility, I'd never seen Susan McDonald until she appeared on 7:30 last week, and she's the Shadow Minister for Resources. So again, something which should not really be in the background given the coalition's focus. But given the invisibility and the incompetence, it's not surprising that minority government is perhaps receding a bit as a possibility. But for argument's sake, if there is a hung parliament, Labor are going to have to deal with the Greens in some form or another, just as they do in the Senate. So it is ludicrous for Albanese to keep bashing the Greens in the way that he does, as if somehow they are worse than the Liberals or the Nationals or some of these far-right fringe organisations.
Well, I mean, I think it speaks to a sense of awareness of the shame that some of them have inside them for abandoning progressive principles. It holds a mirror to how far that party has moved away from the Gough Whitlam days. It's Max Chandler Mathis said the other day that he thought Gough would embrace his platform, and everything I've read about the guy, probably, sure. It's also the fact that we're talking about how effective certain Liberal communicators are, but we're still not talking about the intelligence of their ideas and the great things that they're proposing because that's not actually what they do. It's about how well presented they are while they try to convince us to keep ripping ourselves off. Yeah. Some of them are better at that than other people.
Yeah, no, and look, I think they're really the paucity of the policy offering of the coalition, even with policies that you may disagree with, has really been jaw-dropping. And we've talked about this before, that they haven't done the work, and now they're reaping those sad rewards. And even policies where there has been some modicum of development, like the insane nuclear idea, is in and of itself another one of those kind of fig leaves, so that they've got something to talk about over here. I mean, Matt Canavan belled that cat and explained it very explicitly on Sky News, that it solved a political problem so they could keep doing business as usual. Now, everybody knows there'll be no nuclear power stations built in Australia, regardless of who were to win the election.
No, I think we can't even build a fast train to Sydney. I don't think we're going to build nuclear power plants anytime soon. It's absurd, and it's a distraction, and every serious person knows that. It feels like they are trying to squeeze as much out of the world for their own personal gain on the way to whichever apocalypse hits us first. The really alarming thing, though, is just how much the Labor Party's position seems in alignment with that as well at the moment. We're getting lots of tinkering. We're getting, cheaper fuel offers or some tax deductions, but no one's actually suggesting we fix the problems of inequality and climate change. We are getting a whole lot of, hey, look over there. Here's some shiny
what was extraordinary in the leaders' debate on the ABC was how they brushed up against the key issues, but then didn't engage with them. So they talked endlessly about the cost of energy. And then Spears did raise the point about how many Australians now can't afford insurance because the risk of climate catastrophes where they're living is now so high. But then the dots were not joined about perhaps we shouldn't be obsessing about, a few tens of dollars here on our energy bills when the costs of not dealing with climate change are all around us and are actually threatening to undermine more fundamental issues around our society and the way that we are used to living our lives.
100%. And again, anyone that's worried about creeping authoritarianism, these are the things that you need to worry about in the long term. You know, it's not really individuals that have a huge role over the way history is shaped. It's systems and conditions that create entire populations. And we're not addressing these problems.
We are not. Okay, well, why don't we now head to our interviews? My interview is with Alex Fein again. That we spoke to Alex from Redbridge a few weeks ago, where she was sort of setting the scene for us before the election campaign proper got underway. So we're checking back in with her to see how things are going in her world and her mind. And Dave, your interview.
I'm chatting with Nasser, the head of APAN, Australian Palestine Network. I can't really tell you much about it because the magic of time travel, I haven't done it yet, but I'm sure it'll be informative and interesting.
I think I have absolutely no doubt that it will. So we hope you enjoy those interviews, and we will be back next week, 1 week before the election. Amy Ramikis is going to join us, which is fantastic. One of our panelists. The other one, TBC, but it's going to be someone great. We're just waiting to confirm finally that he's available at the time that we need him. So we look forward to seeing you next week. And in the interim, I hope you enjoy our interviews and the rest of your Easter weekend. Alex, welcome back to the Sunday Shot.
Thanks for having me, Jo.
We're very excited to have you back. As we hit the halfway point of the campaign, now, when we last spoke, you were very clear that most voters really weren't paying attention to politics. We were just the sort of the 1% obsessives. And there is still a conventional wisdom that really it won't be until after Easter that people really knuckle down and think about the upcoming election. Is that still your take, that people are a bit distracted?
Yes, I think sort of the aggregate information kind of the vibe generally is more election oriented for the people outside of the 1%.
Yep.
That said, Trump is so omnipresent, he's so dominant, and he's so much more kind of interesting in people's feeds, not necessarily because they like anything about him, but he's so compelling in as much as, you know, he's doing a lot of really kind of world-altering stuff that does kind of crowd out other news things like the election.
Okay, so people aren't necessarily making a link between the chaos of Trump and trying to protect Australia from that. They're just a bit fascinated with what's going on over there.
Oh, I think they're making the link.
Yep.
They're just not necessarily making it in kind of the same ways that we might see pundits make the link, right? They're not getting into necessarily the intricacies of, you know, various policy questions, but they don't, most people, not everybody, but most don't want that coming here. And that is, I think, that is going to inform how people vote.
So there has been a little bit of commentary, and some of it kind of some real sort of self-induced moments of disaster for Dutton and the coalition campaign around the Trump question. Early on, some of the coalition frontbenchers were saying that strong energy, that's the type of thing you'll get from Dutton. Dutton himself was talking about Trump being a strategic, sharp thinker. And then Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price's intervention on the weekend, Make Australia Great Again. Are people drawing those links that if you want to keep the chaos of Trump away from Australia, you turn away from the coalition, or is that more of a pundit's connection which is being made?
So I think the people who are inclined to be at least somewhat engaged will absolutely make that connection. They generally were not fans of Dutton to begin with, though.
Right.
So, like the people without much definition around Dutton, they are getting kind of, again, that broader vibe of it's kind of Trump-like. They can't necessarily put their finger on what exactly the stuff from Price, I don't think, will have cut through that much. But for the people who are really quite disengaged, I think it's less of a case of knowing how closely the Liberals hew to sort of that Republican kind of aesthetic almost, and more a case of, in this really uncertain time when nothing makes sense anymore, we might want to stick with what we know.
Because there does seem to be in the last week, 2 weeks, this sense that the momentum has really shifted, and that Albanese and Labor are looking in a much stronger position than they did certainly at the start of the year and even at the start of the campaign, that polls are starting to break for Labor. Are you picking that up as well? And do you think, if so, is that now a really unshakable momentum, or is there still time for things to shift around in this sort of volatile age?
So I'd probably get fired if I said that, yes, the Libs are in a death spiral from which they cannot recover, because the most important thing to know about the vote is that the vote is soft.
Yeah.
Right. Which means that, people are pretty unimpressed with the choices available to them, particularly with regard to the major parties. So, it could go either way kind of thing. All that said, what the polls are telling us is that there are people who tend more conservative, but, calling them conservative kind of often gets mistaken for they're having kind of a coherent conservative fiscal and social policy orientation, right?
Mhm.
And it's not really that. Again, it's more kind of a vibe thing. It's more aesthetic. They're going to the right-wing minor parties, but their preferences don't necessarily flow back to the Libs.
Right.
They spray. A lot of them will go back to the Libs, but not all. There are people who are just looking for something completely different, and they don't much care. So they'll go to maybe a right-wing minor party, but if they've had a good experience on the doors with the Greens, for example, the Greens will get their next preference.
And that's interesting, isn't it? And I mean, I remember even when I was running in my little small way at the last election, there was this sense that there's the game which is happening up here in the media, which is being reported on kind of obsessively every day. But then there is the ground game, and that is where a lot of people were taken by surprise, particularly with the Greens, I think, success in Queensland. Are you picking up on that ground game as you do your qualitative research? And is there anything that you're learning from that?
Yes. So I think the ground game is often really important, particularly in an environment where people don't like the two major parties and they're looking for something else. One of the challenges of polling, there are actually a couple of major challenges with this election, and we saw some of those in 22 as well. So the first is the declining reachability of younger voters. They're hard to reach, and so ascertaining their opinions difficult. But the other is being able to model effectively like specific campaigns in specific seats. You can do seat specific polling. That's got its own challenges. When you've got the MRP polls that rely on kind of statistical whiz-bangery is the technical term, I think, then it's very, very hard for them to account. It's actually impossible for them to account for localized, novel ground conditions.
Yeah. But there are a lot of them. I mean, I think that's the thing. If, previously people talk about it being, 151 campaigns actually being run. These days, that seems more true than ever with the splintering of the vote and the move away from the duopoly of the major parties. I think it is now the 22 election, it was about 32% of people who were supporting someone other than Labor or the coalition. And that looks only set to increase. Is there any way that this can be sort of monitored or assessed, or is it really, but it does become a vibe thing?
Yeah, you can get kind of a broad sense of the direction of things, and we're seeing in the polling that sort of independents and minors are benefiting from the retreat from the duopoly. You can do localized qualitative research where you can get a feel for how various campaigns are doing as well. And yeah, like I said, you can do seat-based polling, but it does start to get really, really tricky if you've got particularly a young electorate.
Which certainly a lot of the seats where the community independents and indeed the Greens in Queensland have done well, where there has been an influx of younger voters who are feeling things like the question of housing affordability, even access to rental properties, those sorts of things, which interestingly you did see a focus on at the major party launches. That is where the independents and Greens are doing well, and indeed why in some ways they're doing as well as they are.
That's exactly right. And sort of the narrow focus on home buyers misses a lot of these young people who, with all the engineering in the world, are not going to be able to afford to make a purchase. And they're going to, if they're even aware of these things on offer, and a lot of them won't be aware, but those who are going to see it as Band-Aids on bullet holes, both parties.
Yeah, right. I mean, part of the commentary around policy has been that the coalition really hasn't done the work when it comes to policy development. And so even if people aren't aware of the specifics of this policy and that policy, the fact that there has been such a focus from the coalition on trying to surf a negative wave, if you like, rather than having a specific policy platform to offer, have voters picked up on that? Are they finding the coalition's offering limited or wanting?
So, interestingly, I think it almost wouldn't matter, even if the coalition, unless the coalition was doing something absolutely revolutionary, and talking about wholesale tax reform in ways that are just never going to happen anyway for them. Even if they were doing that, the brand is so damaged. Now, there is going to be a reluctance to believe them that they would do anything for the little person. But that goes often for Labor as well. So on the one hand, I don't want to discount completely the sort of the policy vacuum on the Liberal side, because I think the media's been reporting on it quite consistently. And because of that consistent messaging coming from so many different media outlets, you are going to get that information aggregate thing happening where it will cut through for some people. It definitely will cut through for the designated drivers in, you know, people's social circles, and they will relay that saying like they've got nothing. That is going to filter down.
Are there any sense, so we hear a lot about different divides, you know, the gender divide in particular, but also the age demographic divides as well. And I will come to them. But one thing that I was talking about with my partner on the weekend, you know, I'm an ex-Adelaidean, and Adelaide is, or South Australia is a one paper town. And not only that, but it's a Murdoch tabloid paper town, which makes a big difference. And of course, we had Gather Round in Adelaide and so on. And actually, the amount of election coverage in Adelaide at the moment, seemingly through the pages of the Tiser, is quite limited. Is there a sense that some of these cities and states like Adelaide, South Australia, the Courier Mail up in Brisbane, Western Australian over in WA, that there's a difference in the way that these states are listening and engaging, perhaps driven by the media market, perhaps driven by their more insular states as well, and of course in some cases WA particularly, but Queensland to a lesser extent, they're more isolated states. Is there a sense that there's a different way of engagement and consumption of politics?
Such a brilliant question.
Thank you very much.
Yes. It's a really good question because the answer is yes, but maybe not for the reasons we might have expected. So it's less a case of Murdoch dominance in certain areas because of the retreat from traditional news amongst so many cohorts. What we have seen is a much greater tendency to news aversion in Victoria, particularly among women and young people, than, for example, in New South Wales. And when we drill down, and this is why I love Qual so much, because you couldn't find this out in Quant, is the why behind it.
Yeah.
And it's because Melbourne had such a traumatic pandemic experience with the lockdowns compared to the other states that the news took on a completely different kind of tenor for people. And they still find news consumption traumatic because we kind of segued from pandemic, lockdown, catastrophe into the war in Ukraine and then the war in Gaza and the inflation crisis, and it's too depressing, it's too confronting for people. And so the retreat has been particularly notable in Victoria. We also find qualitatively, this has not been kind of measured quantitatively, so we just want to put that out there, that it seems that where there are young men who are more inclined to far right or being attracted to far right politics, we've found them qualitatively more often in Queensland than in, say, New South Wales. However, I want to put another big caveat on that by saying it's, you know, some small samples, and there are some really progressive, excuse me, parts of Queensland as well. So the gender divide, I think it was so significant in the US, but it wasn't as significant as people were making out. And the women didn't come in and save the US from Trump.
No.
And I don't think the gender divide is as great as some people make out here as well.
Yeah.
I think we're buffered from a lot
I
of
think
things.
that's interesting. A lot of the young women, but people like kind of Hannah Ferguson and Christo Andrews from Crikey, there is this sense that, yes, it's there, but actually it's not as significant as people are saying, and that in the end, the majority of young people do tend to still trend more progressive than other age demographics. So you can pass it down, but actually to put the emphasis on it that there has been is perhaps distorting the picture in some ways.
Exactly. And I think we get confused sometimes because if someone is going to be attracted to far-right politics, then they're more likely to be male.
Yeah.
But not necessarily very young either. They could be millennial or Gen X. But that doesn't mean that most males are going to be attracted to far-right politics.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I've been involved in an organisation called the Vita Fund, which has been raising money and putting it out there for independent women in particular, and so had been doing some deep dive into the issues around gender parity in our parliaments. And as a result, was looking again at the gender breakdowns in the party rooms. And it is clear, and this isn't just my bias showing, like statistically, it's very clear that it is the coalition, both Liberal and the Nationals, who are dragging down gender representation in our parliament, in federal parliament, and that there's nothing about the breakdown of the gender of the candidates that they've pre-selected this time which will change that in any way at all. In fact, it could possibly go backwards. But I did wonder, when you see the way that Dutton is performing on the campaign trail, and in particular, not just the kind of obsessive referencing to being an ex-policeman, but it is about how we are going to, in their minds, make Australia great again, get Australia back on track. And it's manufacturing, it's agriculture, it's mining, it's these very male-dominated industries that he references consistently, even though that only takes up 20% of our workforce, and actually education and healthcare, which is female-dominated sectors, employ more people these days. And I wondered if, well, A, that sort of blokiness which is being projected, ex-cop, trying to get involved in these sectors, if that is a turn-off for women, but also whether the fact that they just don't have as many strong women sitting around the shadow cabinet tables talking about the lived experience of women, of particularly, women, professional women doing the juggle, that there is a blindness there that they are just unaware of, which does impact out in the electorate.
Absolutely. We saw the work from home debacle as a prime example of that. And it didn't cut through everywhere, but it cut through enough. And the blokey stuff that Dutton gets up to, it just is, most people aren't seeing any of it. Their algorithms will penalize that sort of content anyway, for many reasons. But one of those many reasons is that people don't want to see it.
Yeah.
And where gender really does become important is that women, particularly in teal seats, but not only in teal seats, have had a gutful of just very obviously middle-class white men being their choice. And it's just like, no, I'm voting for a woman just because.
Yeah.
And they might not have any other definition around the candidates whatsoever, but it's just, it's enough now. Thank you.
Yeah. We want the kind of no-nonsense accomplished women rather than the good blokes who don't seem to be doing anything for me and making things easier for my family.
Those blokes aren't even seen as good. They're seen as just cogs in the political machinery.
Yeah.
Doing the bidding of the parties, like serving the interests of parties and the parties' paymasters. And there's something deeply inauthentic about them in voters' minds as well. And women who do not speak like politicians have a real advantage as a result.
Whilst it's come about in a whole variety of different ways, what is interesting is that if you'd said, prior to the election being called, perhaps not immediately after Christmas, coming out of the summer holidays where Labor still hadn't quite reset in the way that they needed to. But whilst there is some disaffection with the government, indeed disappointment perhaps, there never really did seem to be the mood of having the baseball bat under the bed, which is often required to precipitate a change of government.
Yes, up to a point. It was palpably different, sort of voter dissatisfaction and at times anger with Albanese as compared with Morrison. Like, there was just this pervasive relief that people felt after Morrison was gone. And I don't think people have that sense about Albanese, but you have a significant number of people who do feel betrayed by him because he positioned himself as someone who came from social housing, and his mother struggled so much and he struggled so much, and there were real expectations of the sort of structural reform that would help ordinary people be able to, stop treading water and get ahead. And that never came.
Right.
And so it might not have been baseball bats, but it was something. Like,
Yeah,
people
right.
were pretty cross. It's just that the alternative is really, really unappealing. It used to be received wisdom that punters definitely would hate the idea of the chaos and confusion of a hung parliament, and you could absolutely scare the punters with that. It's just not true.
Yeah, I mean, I think because they've seen a successful, competent and expanded crossbench in this 47th parliament just gone. And so, why wouldn't they want more of that, more people collaborating, kind of really focusing on policy and trying to reach a consensus position?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we'll soon see, because we are just a few short weeks away now from the elections. So, Alex, we're so grateful to you for your insights. They're really very illuminating. And probably the next time we chat, we'll know what the hell's going on with the 48th Parliament, and we can, obsess over the entrails and get your post-election analysis then.
Thank you so much, Jo. It's been great to talk to you.
We are joined by Nasser Mashni from APAN, Australia's Palestinian Network. Nasser, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, David.
This is a very troubling time for lots of us, not just people in your community, but for Australians that are watching this genocide unfold on their phone while their Prime Minister's refusing to even utter that word. How are you, Nasser?
Look, it's tough, David. I go through moments of, sort of minor euphoric moments, and I say they're minor, but they are significant. My wife and I had dinner at a very salubrious suburb, and quote unquote, got to say, rich white space. We were the token darkies for the restaurant to talk about their DEI policy. We had our dinner at a table over the back of my wife's right shoulder, table of 5, boisterous, enjoying, the Easter spirit and Easter holidays. At the end of that dinner, they were leaving. A woman got up and she hesitantly sort of approached our table, apologized profusely for interrupting our dinner, and was just so gracious and thankful and respectful, and thanked me for all of the work I'm doing and for leading a space of humanity and inclusion. And forever, like I've done this my entire life, spoken for Palestine, but spoken for humanity and Indigenous justice and, queer justice, etc. my entire life. I've understood the intersectionality of all of those struggles. The set we could never crack, if you will, the space that it was most resistant to us is that live, love, laugh. Rich white woman, Chardonnay sipping, tennis club, golf club. I'm trying to desperate housewives of whatever.
Yeah.
That set is so far removed from us that the intersection is very thin. And here she was in the middle of this, quote unquote, very rich white restaurant. Left her group, came over, was effusive in her praise, checked in on my wife. How are you going? Just know we're with you. And so you get those moments of things are going to change, yeah. But then you have the other moments where, you've got to go to the shops to pick up milk and bread, and you just see the world going on as if nothing's wrong. That nothing's wrong here, that nothing's wrong in Palestine, that nothing's wrong in Sudan or Congo or West Papua. That, where any one of us is only, tops a 5-minute drive from a Salvation Army or Vincent de Paul food kitchen. And that, we're talking in this very, I can't believe Australia is so rich that we've got primary schools that don't have air conditioning, and we're funding private schools, and that there's homelessness, and what is it? This year we're going to be on record, for the greatest femicide we've had, to date. A woman every 3 and a bit days is getting killed by her partner, and people are just in this zombie trance of consumerism, of individuality without a connection or an empathy to anyone else. And then I overlay that with people I've known along my school life, business life, professional life, and the levels of engagement they've had with the genocide and or me, from complete disconnection to marginal acknowledgement to full immersion. And the dispersion of that, diminishes exponentially as to how many people, quote unquote, care. So sorry for that long answer.
No, it's
a spectrum.
Please speak your truth. It's obviously I'm coming from it. I'm not Palestinian, but I've been reporting on this for quite a while now. And I've experienced that very similar phenomenon amongst comfortable, white, liberalish people, where if I bring up the genocide and I get a little bit emotional and I start swearing, the problem is that I've been swearing. The problem isn't the fact that God knows.
Kids are burnt alive in a tent.
Exactly.
That women have been giving birth for a year and a bit without anesthetic, that cesareans have happened without anesthetic, that women have not had feminine hygiene products in over a year. This concept of white feminism that stops at fragile white femininity. And where is the outrage for? I mean, they were jumping up and down for Ukrainian women. What about Palestinian women? No, absolutely. But also, when we're talking, it's a cognitive dissonance, whatever it is, that the imagery, etc., is so disturbing as to, it should just shock every one of us out of our comfort zones to say enough. I mean, if you were, a little bit left of center, on October 7, you would have been Israel all the way. They've got it. And there was a moment, I'd argue, where Israel could have actually gone to the world and said, well, now you know what we're dealing with, quote unquote. You see what they're like. They're animals, they're savages. And I mean, the West's still buying it. But anyway, in that moment, they would have had a plurality and huge support for almost anything. Almost anything. We're building a wall. International forces have to come here. You have to impose a solution on them. Relocate 50%. I don't know what it could have been, but they could have actually almost got anything. Instead, they went hell for leather, actual Zionism, which is white supremacy, which is settler colonialism, which is, what you need to do is get the indigenous people to such a small percentage of the overall population as to be arguably completely dismissible. And we see that here in this continent with indigenous folk, but everywhere settler colonialism has been, from Turtle Island to Aotearoa, anywhere. that settler colonial project didn't succeed because we're more than 50% of the population. And so when it gets the opportunity, it goes, great, smash, drive Indigenous folk off the cliffs of Van Diemen's Land, etc. And because it didn't take that opportunity and it drove into exactly what it is, which is genocidal, racist, white supremacism, ethno-religious supremacy. For a week, a month, perhaps even to Christmas 23, that space was, well, they've got to do it. They've got to be safe. I mean, music festival, my kids. And then the lies started coming out, it started to be dispelled. 40 beheaded babies, systematic rapes, etc.
We never blow up a hospital. We're the most moral army in the world, and now there aren't hospitals left.
There aren't hospitals left. The Hannibal director being called in, the video, the imagery of that car park that, if people are old enough, they might remember the highway out of Kuwait when Saddam was leaving Kuwait, when the Americans, strafed the entire line, 10 kilometers long of fleeing Iraqis and just killed everybody. All of the lies that Israel perpetuated to manufacture the consent for and got probably overwhelming support for the best part of 2 months, maybe even up to 6 months for some people. But here we are 18 months later, coming into our 19th month. Like the average person is, what the F? This is not self-defense. This is, and so I know categorically October 6th was peak Israel. On October 6th, if you're an Israeli, you're out there going, hi, I'm from Israel. Yeah, it's fantastic, IT nation, birth, startup country, all that bullshit they, used to spin, the land without people, people without a land. We made the desert bloom. All of their terra nullius, settler colonial language to dismiss anything was there beforehand and any claim to it before they were there. To today, I mean, Israelis are, I see videos of them in Thailand or whatever. They're not saying they're Israeli, Disney's Snow White bombs because it's got that genocidea Greenstein Godot in there. I'm sure in business rooms at the C level in businesses, they're going, we've got this proposal from a US company, one from a Finnish company, and one from an Israeli company. They're like, get rid of that shit. I don't want to risk what might happen if it gets out that we're dealing with an Israeli company. I mean, it's a risk mitigation strategy. You need the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement picking you today. That space has shifted, and so now we've got this. And I won't lie, this woman was, an older woman, but obviously would have been very, very gorgeous in her day. Blonde hair, gold, jewelry. She's now on Team Palestine. And that didn't happen because Nasser tells a good story. It didn't happen because anything I'm saying today, 560 days later, is different to what I said 1,000 days ago or 2,000 days ago. It's the same story. It's really simple. White supremacy, a settler colonial ideology came and took my land. Full stop. It's not my fault they're Jewish. It's not my fault they're Jewish. We would resist if they were Sikh, Hindu, whatever. Doesn't matter. That space is now here. And don't worry about her because she's in her 50s as I am. They're kids who have not had the lies and the manipulation of Paul Newman's Exodus movie, not had the manipulation and lies of the kibbutz, socialist enterprise. They haven't had the lies of a people without a land, for a land without people, for a people without a land. All of the bullshit mythology that the Zionist movement created that sold the boomers on the need for this racist, genocidal state. The kids haven't got any of that shit.
No, I mean, we are drowning in hasbara and myth and propaganda in our mainstream media, but the kids have a little bit of a detachment from that. They are
well, they're not. Murdoch's not speaking to them. Stokes is not speaking to them. Nine's not speaking to them.
Yep.
They're getting their stuff from influencers and from sites that, I mean, I don't know that you wouldn't know, David. Like, my kids don't watch TV. They've never bought a newspaper. They don't listen to the shock jock.
No.
Like, and these are my kids who are politically engaged and have been at protests in their mother's womb. Yeah, we used to have competitions to hand out flyers in Burke Street Mall in the days when our protests were 30 people or 20 people. I mean, I've spoken at rallies, David, where I was related to everyone. Yeah, I was related to everyone in there, like a blood relative. That's how big our rallies were. And I've spoken to crowds of 50 and 100,000. I've spoken to over 1 million people in person at rallies. I don't know, it'd be more than 1 million, let alone the interviews and the media, nationally as well as globally. Like peak Israel's October 6th, they don't get to go back to this plucky little nation in a hostile area.
Yeah.
Everyone realizes it's a shithole. It's a racist shithole. And you can support it
too.
Yeah, you can support it, but just know what I'm going to think of you. And, you know, it's going to get support from the Peter Duttons. It's going to get support from the Donald Trumps. It's going to get support from far right figures, because that's where Israel belongs.
Yeah.
It belongs in that space.
I'm worried that it's also getting support from, you know, I don't even want to call them left-wing parties because they're not, but the more left option around the world, the UK Labour Party, the Australian Labour Party, the Democrats in the United States. One of the things that disturbs me most about the shape of Anglo-Western democracy is that, for me, this is the biggest issue on the planet alongside climate change and the growing inequality of wealth. And those three, you don't have any choice on the ballot amongst the major parties. They are all in alignment with American capitalism, with the Zionist settler project, and with continued fossil fuels.
David, I'd argue you're absolutely right. There's no question you're right, you know, at a leadership level. But if you have a look at how much is happening underneath, like, you know, the number of Labor branches that are Friends of Palestine, that passed motions that are way beyond and past where the current Labor Party is, their platform, which hasn't been delivered, recognition of Palestine, etc., etc. The leadership is not representative of its membership. Bernie Sanders had a rally a couple of days ago, and he went with, you know, Israel's got a right to defend itself, bullshit. And the people unfurled a Free Palestine banner, and then, you know, he stopped speaking and the police took him away, and the whole crowd started chanting Free Palestine. Now, Bernie Sanders is the hero of the left, a dinosaur, 80-year-old bloke, 80-year-old white bloke. I mean, you've been in the Senate for 50 years. At some point, work out you didn't do anything and get out of the way and let somebody else in. And you have a look at that, whether it's in the UK with Keir Starmer, he's not representative of, I mean, if they had preferential voting there, he wouldn't be Prime Minister. They've got first past the post. And have a look today. I mean, our movement has been, you know, fighting for something to do, something tangible to do. And this election is it. And, you know, at APAN, the Australia Palestine Advocacy Network, we've released a whole suite of actions that our constituency can do to ensure that Palestine's on the ballot. And for years, I've advocated for and pressed politicians and explained to them from both sides of the party. You know, the deputy Liberal leader, Susan Ley, was a chair of the Parliamentary Palestine Friendship Group. Yeah.
I mean, Albanese founded that one.
Albanese founded it, yeah. So we've got, but I mean, he's still quote unquote notionally pro-Palestine according to a Zionist. Susan Ley, you know, is like completely on Team Israel now. She's an Israel firster from being, you know, a co-chair of the Parliamentary Palestine Friendship Group. That now our constituency has got something to do. An action. What can I do to support Palestine? How can I make Palestine do my bit for Palestine? We've had a superannuation campaign, which we're going to ramp up in the second part of this year. But the election is our focus. And I sincerely believe, really believe, that Palestine could have been a vote winner for these people. That today it's going to be a vote coster for many, a vote coster. And it's going to be a winner for progressive parties. And when you talk about those three great things that we, as I'm going to call us humanists, firstly, or empaths, care about: climate, wealth inequality, and Palestine. If we can't win on Palestine, like the global movement for justice for Palestine is unlike anything that's ever been seen before. No fight for anything ever before. Not the anti-Vietnam, not anti-Iraq, not gender stuff. There's never before have the street filled with people with one voice, one thing. If they beat Palestine, we've got no chance on income. We've got no chance on climate. We've got no chance on anything else. This is the defining moment where power, white supremacy, patriarchy has absolutely said we have to smash this. And if they do succeed in smashing this, we've got no hope.
I agree with everything you've said, and there's absolutely a groundswell amongst ordinary people, humanitarians. I agree entirely. At the same time, we are seeing those in power really ratchet up things. I mean, I've seen the worst things I've ever seen over the last 18 months or so, and it's still getting worse. We're seeing concentration camps in El Salvador. We're seeing brown people deported without due process, taken out of America, basically for saying free Palestine. We are like, the frog is well and truly boiled here, and I just really wish people could see how linked all this is. It's terrifying.
It is absolutely terrifying, David. There's no question. I have great capacity of hope and believe in humanity. That said, we can't but think about that poem by a Lutheran priest at Neubauer that said, first they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came out for the socialists. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. They came for the gypsies. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a gypsy. They came for the whoever. And then they came for me. And there was nobody left to speak out. That this is the canary in the coal mine. When you talk about Mahmoud Khalil in the US Columbia University student leader, being snatched from his 8-month pregnant wife. I mean, she must be due to give birth any moment now, whisked away to an ICE detention center 3 or 4 states away, so that they disconnect the family from their support network and from their people, to a judge moving him to a place where Donald Trump appointed judge presides over the case. There was an El Salvadorian kid who was illegally grabbed, and one ICE agent saying, this is not the guy, and the other ICE agent saying stuff at grab him anyway. And he's a US citizen and now is languishing in a El Salvadorian jail, and you get the image of Donald Trump, leader of the free world, and the president of El Salvador joking to each other that neither of them could do anything to get this kid back. And we know they are death camps. These concentration camp, arguably, although we know how evocative that image is. These are concentration camps. I'm going to think of there was a better word for it, but these are death camps. You go there to be forgotten by society and to not come out. And we're enabling it. We're part of it. We're speaking to it. And and when I say that, in not condemning, you're taking a position, in not saying enough, in not doing everything we can to stop whatever it is. One of the things that politicians say is that nothing we do would matter. That's not the burden that you're under. Your burden is to do everything you can to ensure that you're not complicit. And that might make no difference, but at least your conscience is clear, and every Australian is innocent of complicity. That's what we need to hold people to.
And people are also unaware of the ripple effects of their actions. If someone's brave, then that inspires someone else to be brave, and so on and so on and so on. And that's why we don't roll over for fascist assholes. This is to get to this state of depravity, we've had to really condition people via the media to just accept anti-Palestinian racism and accept the dehumanization of Palestine. One of the things that shocks me is how socially acceptable anti-Palestinian racism is. I have people in my life that would not say a racist word about Jewish people or Indigenous Australians even, but they would say things that imply that there's something about Palestinians that make them more inherently prone to want to throw rockets, or, this natural terrorist gene or something. And they can only get to that point if they've removed all context from the situation. And that's why I blame the media for this, because that is literally what the media does. These phrases like Israel has a right to defend itself deny the fact that for 78 years it's been aggressively not defending itself, it's been expanding its borders. It's upside down way of describing these things.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I don't have a comment. You know, the anti-Palestinian racism that exists in our society, you would argue that the more anti-Palestinian racist you are, the better you do in your job. Like you almost get rewarded for it. I mean, our alternative prime minister is on record that he's going to, you know, wants to deport people marching under a Palestinian flag. He's going to, you know, get a plebiscite up to change the constitution, allow deportation of dual citizens if they. I mean, the pandering to a constituency is so sickening and vile and cheap as to beg a belief. And I would argue today, and this is one of the challenges we have with, you know, definitions like the University of Australia is adopting the, you know, based on the flawed and really disgusting IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, is that today, what anti-Semitism looked like in the world was ultimately was the Holocaust. Move away from that with Spanish pogroms, Spanish Inquisition pogroms, Western Crusades. I mean, it's a Western disease, you know. This white people invented this shit. But then you look at what was anti-Semitism in post-World War II, and you know, the quote-unquote miracle that is the birth of Israel. Anti-Semitism in the West meant that, you know, Joshua Goldberg graduates Melbourne University or Sydney University and can't get a job because he's Goldberg. He's a Jew. We don't employ Jews, you know. He can't join, you know, the clubs, Melbourne Club or all those other clubs. He can't join a golf club, like the golf clubs, the Melbourne golf clubs, Sydney golf clubs. You know, that's where the business is done on the golf club, etc. He couldn't join those. And so you suddenly had Jewish law firms, you know, and then you suddenly had Jewish clubs. And then they went and built their own golf clubs. Yeah. And that was the reality of anti-Semitism. There was a power that existed and a ceiling that oppressed and an exclusion because you're a Jew. Mm-hmm. 2025, those golf clubs are gone. Joshua Goldberg or his female equivalent is working in any law firm she wants to or he wants to. They're members of any club they want to or could be. But if you drill down into the ECAG anti-Semitism report beyond the headline, 1,000% increasing, and you drill into what do they claim is anti-Semitism. I was on a tram and I saw somebody wearing a keffiyeh. I didn't feel safe. Anti-Semitism. Israel is an apartheid state. Boycott Israel. There was a student encampment and they were shouting from the river to the sea. Anti-Semitism. Overlay that with anti-Palestinian racism. It wasn't easy for an Australian of Palestinian ancestry to say you were Palestinian on October 6. On October 6, 76 years into the settler colonial project of Israel, but 116 years or something after Lord Balfour gave Palestine to Baron Rothschild in the Balfour Declaration, 1917. 160 years later. It wasn't easy being Palestinian then, let alone today. Many of our crew have sort of broken through that self-denialism, censorship of pretending to be Lebanese or Egyptian or Syrian, so they didn't have to deal with being Palestinian. They're now upwardly proud being Palestinian. But you can be David Miller, school teacher, wanting to teach about Palestine, boom, parents are writing a letter in. You can be Antoinette Lattouf and share a Human Rights Watch post that the ABC shared themselves. And that's not going to stop the lobby from writing through to Ida Buttrose, who in her 8th decade and a bastion of femininity on the witness stand goes, shit, suggests to David Anderson, the managing director of the ABC, can't she just get COVID? You know, can we just tell her to get COVID? It's Khalid Sabsabi losing his invitation being to the Venice Biennale. It's a writer's workshop at the State Library. It's Keely Green being suspended from Queensland Music Awards for giving a speech about Palestine, and her album being about Palestine. It's kids getting sacked from a job for wearing a keffiyeh on World Keffiyeh Day. It's Alex Evans, who was at the Commonwealth Bank, in his own capacity, wrote a letter to the editor, and it was published in the Australian, and he loses his job. It's Jason Gilham, conductor, musician at the MSO, you know, loses his gig. It's Peter Laylor, a cricket commentator, sharing a tweet, 50-year, you know, bowling chain, you know, a bastion of cricket, gets a call from his boss saying, some of our listeners feel unsafe when they hear your voice. It's an Officeworks staff member who said that he doesn't want to laminate a horrid post from the Australian Jewish News, and unknown to him is being videoed, and that ends up being shared all over the joint. All of these incidences of anti-Palestinian racism, not one of them is Palestinian. Khalid Sabsabi is a Lebanese Muslim guy. Antoinette Lattouf is a Lebanese Christian person. All the rest of them are just Bob and Mary from the burbs, and merely being a little bit quote unquote pro-Palestinian, have had the complete and utter weight of everything jumped on them. You know, when the doxing of the 600 artists for Israel, and I got questioned by somebody, one of the reporters, and they never actually extended on. He goes, you know, what do you think of that? And I said, oh, I think about it. What about the people they're hitting? I said, I'm happy. You can go through. I don't know how many WhatsApp groups I'm in. Seriously, like it's hundreds. Like some mornings I wake up and there's 500 messages in. I'll give you my phone and you go through it and you find a message where I go, Josh Greenberg, he works at Greenberg and Associates. How do we get rid of Josh? Our messages are, has anybody heard from Dave? I haven't seen him at a protest for a while. He was struggling last time. Can somebody reach out and check on in on him? It's self-care stuff. It's there's an Indigenous woman that's struggling to make her bills. Can we do a quick, whip around to the hat? What time's the protest today? Do you think I can bring my dog? Is it all right if I bring my kid? You know, can we carpool? You know, we need to do something about Peter Khalil. Can somebody? I mean, that in the Artists for Israel, there's 600 people there, and I think somewhere around 50 were active. Yeah. But 50 people are going, let's get them.
Yeah.
You know, and these are not people without power. I mean, we've seen some of the redacted emails, etc., that went into the AOC, but that was Lawyers for Israel, another group.
Mm-hmm.
You've got 50 people going, get them. And you've got another 150 people perhaps going, yeah. And then you've got 400 people silent. Some of them leave the group, some of them enter the group. And this reporter said to me, you know, what do you think? And I went, look, I don't want to comment on them. I want to have a look at what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
I said, but if you wanted me to care about 600 people, the 50 people that said, let's get them, they're assholes. They're assholes. And the 150 people that go, yeah, they're assholes too. And the 400 people that didn't say, stop this, you're assholes too. But I don't care about those 600 people. Over here, you've got a woman, Clementine Ford, who's a publisher. They're writing to, does anyone know her publisher? Does anyone know how we can make sure she can't ever write a book again?
Uh-huh.
You can go through my phone, David. You will not find a message where we said, let's get Josh Greenberg.
Mate, I don't need to go through your phone.
I mean, so that power that existed with anti-Semitism has gone. We've got this, not that anti-Semitism isn't real. It's absolutely real, and I'll tell you a story about that in a second. But what we have is anti-Palestinian racism with all the power and the smashing that existed in that space that doesn't exist anymore being directed on us. And I'll say about anti-Semitism, why it's so important to fight anti-Palestinian racism and why we need to call out anti-Zionism and anti-Israelism when it gets overlaid as anti-Semitism to protect this racist genocidal state, is that often, I mean, I get that much hate, it's not funny, and I've got a policy that I block Z trolls, delete block. But every now and again, I'll go on their profile. And there was a guy who went, deport, exclamation mark. And I went, okay, beauty. And well, I'm going to check him out. And I went and, there was his post, deport. And his post just below that was effing Jewish lizard people control the world. Like the real anti-Semitism is actually the same as real anti-Palestinian racism, which is the same as real homophobia and real patriarchy and real white supremacism.
It's all just
we need
hatred.
to be fighting together. We need to be fighting together, not saying, oh, here's a special sort of thing, and we better give them a special envoy. And Peter Dutton wants to set up if he's re-elected, set up a special division to open up cold cases of anti-Semitism, because we're not sure that Labor's actually got all of them.
Jesus. You've outlined how this works. The chilling culture on arts, on academia. I think right now we're at the point where it's quite obvious that this is more than just reactionary assholes trying to shut people down. This is, especially the stuff with the universities, it is a form of creeping authoritarianism, creeping fascism that is chilling me to the bone, really, especially when you see where America is always a few years ahead of where we end up being.
I mean, we saw Columbia University, to get $400 million in funding, had to give up a whole bunch of stuff and appoint a Trump nominee and a department to oversee every department and every course and make sure that everything's happening. Harvard University a day ago rejected that, said you can keep your money, we don't want it. How long they'll be able to hold that for, who knows? But this, when universities are supposed to be spaces, the whole concept of a tenured professor was that they were removed from the triviality, if you will, of having to work to eat and shelter, that they could challenge free thought, move society's ideas and the body of knowledge of our community forward. And that's what universities are supposed to do when they're at their best, a real robust exchange of ideas. And we know that when this is happening, we're moving society, etc., upwards and onwards. If we get to this point where we are in Columbia, where what was proposed for Harvard, and at some point I imagine they'll be able to push that through, but we have special departments protecting what can be said and how it might be said and who might say it and who might be employed. We are absolutely halfway through George Orwell's 1984. We are absolutely in mind control. We are absolutely, just another brick in the wall, as the song goes, yeah. And we've got to resist it, and we've got to fight it.
Let's talk about the West more generally, because one of the things that I think is really coming home to roost now is that progressives within American sphere of influence have basically felt like they could memory hole what's going on in the Middle East. They can be, as long as they're espousing, gay rights, black rights at home in the imperial core, we'll just ignore the fact that all this is propped up by the fact that we've murdered about 5 million brown people in the Middle East since 9/11, that we've been pilfering oil from the region for decades. And I think what we're seeing really is the imperial boomerang effect that Hannah Arendt talked about, where, these modes do come home. Your leaders, your populations become that this is normalized, this type of violence. And more than that, the people that are in charge, they work out how to do this stuff. They work out what they can get away with. And it really feels like just a failure of establishment progressive parties to not see where this was always heading.
Yeah. But that's what capitalism does. It commodifies us, and it fragments societies and communities and individualizes us, and it gets us to the point where we want to protect what's mine. We want to protect what's mine. And so, if you go back to Bill Shorten and Scott Morrison, the unlosable election, and he talks about franking credits, which 99% of us don't get. Like, our super funds get it, but I mean, it's not whether we got it or not. If everybody didn't get it or everybody did get it in a super fund, it's not going to make a grand difference. But the people who get it outside of super funds where it does actually make a huge difference, they're not us. It's not us. I've never had a franking credit in my life that I know about. Negative gearing. You can own 1,000 properties. We'll just keep giving you tax back. Yeah. We saw with Purple Pingers, getting condemned by our Prime Minister for a house that was empty for 17 years, that housed the belongings of a woman's dead parents for 17 years, that a squatter moved in, and the outrage. I mean, what about the outrage if the house has been empty for 17 years? What about the outrage? What sort of, if my children got, like, it's a long time ago, if I'm dead and they haven't gone through my stuff for 17 years, what sort of kids have I raised? Where's that question? People, if one person every 4 days dies from issues related to homelessness, that's not the conversation. Rather, it's Purple Pingers, Jordan, that's getting smashed. That intrinsically left policy that Bill Shorten ran on, which, should you own 50 properties? Well, if you own 50 properties, you own 50 properties, but you're not getting anything from the government. Yeah, we're not going to give you anything, and what have you had? Okay, we'll grandfather that, but we're not giving you anything anymore. That gets smashed, that franking credits get smashed, that, a guy who ends up saying to women who are protesting for the rights of women following the rape of Brittany Higgins, that guy then says, these women should be happy they're in Australia, because if they were in any other country, they'd be machine gunned. And, that ends up being our Prime Minister. And then you look at it from a leadership perspective, but then come down to, like, the street level. Like, I'm old enough to remember a copper having a revolver, right? And, being in shirt sleeves. You see an average police guy today, get pulled over for a random breath test or, a traffic stop. This guy looks like he could invade Iraq. Like, he's in that much kit. I mean, that much kit. You look at our riot squads and all those stuff. I mean, they've got more kit than the crew that went to Vietnam, or the militarization of. And then you get to, okay, please stand for the national anthem. I mean, I can't remember ever standing for the national anthem as a kid at the footy, but now, it's Anzac Day. Lest we forget that rich white dudes who had a measure of the world, God, king, empire, then everything else. They were sliding pieces all over. Went side.
Yeah.
Wild colonial boys, diggers, to Gallipoli.
And on the board, a uniform, the poor people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to go, these I call them wild colonial boys, to bring up that, A.E. What's his name? Who wrote the poem? Anyway, it escapes me. But you go to Ballarat or Bendigo, any one of these regional towns, and go to a World War I memorial, and you'll see J. McNamara, N. McNamara, S. McNamara, brothers, uncles, fathers, sons, wiped from the population registry in the pursuit of God, King, Empire. And Gallipoli is the birth of the Anzac spirit. And if you interrogate that, the Anzac spirit, I'm okay sending my kid, because some rich dude wanted to protect the empire, to his slaughter. And if you ever visit Gallipoli, you'll realize that an elevated position, with World War I, leather boots, nails in the boots. I mean, not rubberized stuff, in those Hessian sacks with, a week's worth of provisions, jumps out in a 50-kilo backpack into, nipple-deep water, trudging through with a bolt-action rifle to get to a beach. And, I mean, you read some of the stories of the Turks, how harrowing it was for them to go, what are they doing? And hearing the order shoot and just going, boom, 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 boom. And them going, why won't they stop jumping out of the boats? Can they not see what's happening? And the birth of the Anzac spirit is that sacrifice that our most naive and beautiful and innocent Australians coming off the farm in Bendigo, Ballarat, Sale, Wonthaggi, Warrnambool, wherever, get on a ship, 6 weeks training on a ship, and then jump out and are massacred moments, in a timeline after leaving their mother's embrace. That's the Anzac spirit, that we're standing up. I mean, we're almost, what the hell? The thing that was great about Australia is we would laugh at ourselves and mock that sort of gross nationalism. All stand for, we thank the veterans. I mean, we're thanking veterans now. I'm only standing with the Australian flag. I won't stand with an Indigenous flag. One flag for everyone. We're not dividing anything. And whoa, if you try and challenge that. Yasmin Abdul Majid, brilliant Australian Sudanese woman, hijabi, she on the ABC, it's over a decade ago, said, lest we forget, Palestine, Sudan, and they went after her. She had to leave the country.
Yep.
She had to leave the country. Don't you dare challenge. Mm-hmm. And now, Anzac Day, that was a nothing. I mean, I went to quote unquote rich white schools on a scholarship. And we would do, sing in the choir at Anzac Day and stuff. We had 500 people, some old dudes, and, maybe 1,000. But now the procession and the closing down and the dawn services, this veneration of the sacrifice. We haven't had a war to protect Australia ever. We have been involved in many military adventures that were about Western imperialism and Western hegemony. There is one thing that we can and should be proud of from a military perspective, aside from the frontier wars. We won't even talk about, the frontier wars and how they're not acknowledged at the Australian War Museum, etc., the decimation of Indigenous culture, etc., and the genocide that continues here in this colony. But the one thing the Australian Defence Force should be proud of is how they held the Japanese in Kokoda. The Japanese were invading Australia.
Yep.
And if people don't know this story, I'll just very quickly, David, if you indulge me, when the Japanese were bombing Darwin and Curtin would to Churchill and said, the Japanese are here, and Churchill went, God, King, Empire. It's one of the architects of the Gallipoli massacre. God, King, Empire, Curtin. And he said, I've got to save Australia. And Churchill said to him, draw a line from Brisbane to Adelaide. Negotiate with the Japanese and give them everything west of the Brisbane line. And when we beat the Germans, we'll come back and help you with the Japanese. And Curtin, to his great credit, said, piss off. And he recalled the Aussie troops out of North Africa, but in the meantime had to hold Kokoda, because if the Japanese had got Kokoda and that forward air base, they would be able to bomb further south into Australia than just the north of it. And the diggers that held Kokoda were ex-World War I men, were kids. So if you go to the gravesite, and I've been there in Kokoda, the ages are 50 and 44 and 16 and 17. These were kids too young to get to Europe, and guys that were too old. And they held Kokoda until the regular forces came back. That would be an Anzac spirit. All of us should be proud of and get behind that sacrifice to save Australia from invasion. But every other, from the Boer War through to Afghanistan, we've been just an instrument in Western imperialism, and it's shameful.
100%. I'm glad you brought up the genocide on this island against Indigenous people. Obviously, not a cheery thing to talk about, but I do wonder sometimes whether the memory holding, the cognitive dissonance, the instinctive Israel has a right to defend itself that comes out in people is based on the way we choose not to perceive what actually happened here.
There's no question, David. There's no question. On October 7, whether it was the media or politicians, we immediately stood with Israel. And it was a reflex. It's like a fly, you know, it's not something you think about. Your hand just waves the fly or the mozzie away. You know, it's a reflex. And it's a reflex because this joint is the same white supremacist, settler colonial, smash Indigenous, where the enlightened, chosen, whatever you want to call that supremacist notion. And so Israel is Australia, Australia is Israel, is America, is every one of these white supremacist nations. And it said, oh my God, the rebels are rising, the Indigenous are rising, you know. And I remember reading something just on that very quickly. We can watch a movie, and when the rebels fight back, we root for them. Yeah, come on, Empire Strikes Back. You know, go Luke Skywalker.
Star Wars explains all of this shit.
But when you're a brown person, like, no, we're going for the Empire. You know, like in the movies, we're all go, you know, go. We're fighting for the oppressed, whether it be Dune or Star Wars or any one of those movies. We're barracking for the underdog. It's the Empire that oppresses all of us. It's the Empire that says you can have 1,000 houses and you can destroy Indigenous sites to get coal, and you can imprison Indigenous kids at a rate not seen anywhere else in the world. And you can imprison Indigenous folk at a percentage of population not seen anywhere else in the world. And you can take their kids away and strip them of language and culture and still find a representative of that community to sit next to our alternative prime minister and say, I want to make Australia great again. Like it's ever been great for an Indigenous person for the past 238 years from when Captain Cook's ship sailed in.
The thing that just boggles my mind is that when American Star Wars fans, they decide that this is about ancient Rome, and it's like, man, he was a hippie in the 60s. He's definitely writing about America.
We love smoking Woodstock.
Right?
Jimi Hendrix, wake the fuck up.
How do we, all right, let's wrap it up. Where to from here? What do we do? How do we keep fighting the good fight?
Yeah. Look, it's so important, David. It's a really important question. So in the first instance, we've got to vote for Palestine. Make sure you quiz your candidate. Go to the APAN website, APAN, Australia Palestine Advocacy Network.org.au, and take our voters pledge. Send an email to all of your candidates saying your vote is going to be for Palestine. And as we said earlier in the interview, voting for Palestine is about voting for climate justice, about voting for income equality. It's about Indigenous rights. It's about all of those intersectional struggles to fight against homophobia, patriarchy, etc. Number one. Number two is to get involved in your solidarity groups. You know, find them on Facebook, go to the APAN website. You can connect to any, I mean, we've got hundreds of groups now, you know, like Banyul for Palestine, Mums for Palestine, Pediatric Workers for Palestine. I mean, the number of For Palestines you can find is just extraordinary. Unionists, whoever you are, there is a For Palestine. I don't know if there's golf players for Palestine yet, but we should be. We just got to get a champion for that. And then to use your privilege. I can't be in every space, in every lounge room, at every birthday, but wherever you are, normalize the conversation around this is unacceptable. And in it being unacceptable, there is a responsibility to do something. And the something tomorrow is to be part of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. That as individuals, we can choose to boycott products that profit from, enable the oppression and dispossession of the Palestinians as individuals. That we can demand divestment from our super funds, from our banking institutions, that they divest from companies that profit from, etc. And that we demand our government sanction Israel. And all of these things exist And a beautiful model exists, not only from the success of that movement, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions in ending apartheid in South Africa, but they exist as an exemplar because they happened 2 years ago to Russia. And the hypocrisy that exists within our ruling set, within our media, that says Russia is occupying Ukraine, therefore we're going to change chicken Kiev to chicken Kiev, or the other way around.
Very freedom fries all over again. Remember when in America they became freedom fries, not French fries? Because France want to invade Iraq and Afghanistan.
Correct. That when Russian flags are not allowed at the tennis. If you're competing as a Russian, you can compete as an international with a white flag, not with a Russian flag. That our banks and financial services entities sold all their Russian holdings. That our government put sanctions on Putin and his associates. That all three of those things were enacted and enabled and led by not only civil society, but are complemented by media and the government. That the hypocrisy, whether it's at a government media or consumer level, that these precious white babies are so much more important and worthy of our empathy than a brown baby. And that ultimately is the difference. And we need to expose that hypocrisy and hold those in power to account. And the first thing we can do is vote for Palestine.
Nasser Mashni, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, David.